Excellent. So let's move on. There's some people who are struggling for seats or standing. There's loads of space. There's two or three tables here with room. So please come and join us up front. You can also get the first sight of the speaker if you're sitting up near the front. There's loads of space. Please join us. Join us in the expensive seats. Okay, let's move on. We're moving now to an interesting perspective from the customer point of view. Ryan Marx is joining us from Ryder Energy Distribution. He's Senior Manager of Fuel Products and Supply. And he's going to be taking us through, I guess, the experience from Ryder as he's seen it. He's been very involved in implementing DEF across the Ryder system. He's going to give us a view of DEF distribution logistics, the current footprint of all distribution networks, the logistics capabilities that are involved with DEF, and some long-term potential risks that could impact demand from his perspective. Ryan joined Ryder in 2007. He spent 7 years involved in issues such as fuel pricing analytics, and for the last 3 years he's been involved as Senior Manager of Ryder Energy Distribution Corporation. He's responsible for the procurement and delivery of fuel, DEF, and lubricants to all Ryder branches across the US, while managing the relationships of a portfolio of over 25 fuel suppliers and 17 haulers to ensure supply is sufficient and obtainable for business needs. Really keyed into DEF and what the issues going on with DEF. So Ryan, welcome to the stage, and it's always good to hear from a perspective of a day-to-day manager and user of fuels and DEF in terms of the challenges and how to approach those. So thanks for joining us, and go ahead, the floor's yours. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today, and I want to say thank you for Integer for putting this together. I know they put a lot of work into it. Well, as I stand up here on this ivory tower, I want to just first announce that I am by no means a DEF expert. I've come more from a fuel background, so I will touch upon that to some degree because it is highly related to the DEF markets as well. But let's see here. I want to start off giving an overview of Ryder itself, and then I'll dive down into what my department is and what my function is at Ryder, and we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So Ryder, from what you would all know and see our trucks on the road, is what we call our fleet management solutions and maintenance. So the truck, the maintenance, the leasing aspect, the trucks you see on the road, that's about 2/3 of our total revenue. Our total revenue is just under $7 billion annually. But what you may not know is that we have two other divisions, which consist of the rest of our business model, and that's our dedicated contract carriage and supply chain solutions. And what that is in dedicated contract carriage is basically we have a dedicated asset, dedicated Ryder driver hired to run specifically the business for a customer's needs. For example, if you go to CVS and buy any of their products, chances are those were delivered by a Ryder dedicated driver and dedicated asset, specifically for CVS's needs. And also we have the supply chain solutions, which is the warehousing, which we have conveyors, pick-to-light systems, and forklifts. We do the in- and outbound logistics for a lot of companies. We have about just under 235,000 assets driving on the road and 44 million square feet of warehouse spacing in which we conduct our supply chain solutions under. Now, more specifically, I work in the Ryder Energy Distribution Corporation. We are a subsidiary of Ryder System, and we were started in 1981. Initially, it was going to be the Ryder Energy Distribution Incorporated, but they didn't want to call it Red Inc., so they changed it to Ryder Energy Corporation for Redco. So our primary function at Redco is to procure and secure diesel and DEF and lubricants for our operations. And I can't emphasize enough the emphasis on the assurance of supply. It's absolutely critical to our customer base and the flow of our operations. Without it, you have a lot of upset customers, and everything just comes to a halt. And you can lose, if a customer comes to the fuel island once and doesn't get fuel, they kind of see you as unreliable, may not, you could lose them forever. So that is really key for us, probably even over price. And over the past 2 months with all the hurricanes, it couldn't speak more volumes than it did then. I'll show another slide kind of explaining some of that. So we manage all the costs of the price of fuel from from the start, from the bidding, the analytics of the bids, to the supplier selections, to contracting with vendors, terminal levels, and who are going to be our partners in strategic places. We manage all the haulers in the contract carriage thereof, from terminal to end site, where we service about 450 Ryder fueling locations, as well as customer on-site captive facilities where they have their own tank in the back, and maybe our dedicated group is operating those operations, but they want us to sell and bring them fuel and DEF. We purchase about 250 million gallons of diesel annually, as well as 6.3 million gallons of DEF. All of our contracts are FOB terminal, and we don't really have our suppliers delivered to end site. So we have contract haulers that do that. And part of this has been the selection of key vendors on the supply side, as well as the hauling side. I can tell you firsthand that without these key partnerships, we would not have gotten through Hurricanes Harvey and Irma without it. We specifically use, and not to just throw in a plug on them, but we use Keenan Advantage for about 2/3 of our portfolio, and they were absolutely paramount and key for us. I could not have done them without them. All of our suppliers are all the major oil refineries that you know of, the Chevrons, the Shells, and Marathons of the world. But we also do a lot of business with the aggregators and resellers such as Mansfield's, Truman Arnold's. So I wanted to put up this slide to show you, this is what we had posted. The picture on your left is a picture that we had posted on our offices for over the past 12 years, until literally about last month before Hurricane Irma came, which was replaced by the one on the right. Where in 2005, we were kindly visited by Hurricanes Wilma and Katrina and Hurricane Ivan that took a battering against Florida. And then you can see a lot of the constraints that happen in fuel. And without these partnerships, we never have gotten through without it. But I must say that during the recent events of the hurricanes, we had very, very short-term runouts, nearly by the hours as opposed to the days, where we were getting unlimited amount of calls from customers who say they were out of fuel and what can we do for them. And all I could tell them was, you come to Ryder and I'll get you fuel. And we only had outages for a few hours. Now, I must say, I know I've been talking about fuel in here, you're here for DEF, but I had zero calls regarding complaints on DEF. We had no runouts, we had no hiccups, and that was key as well. So, and a lot of that is because of the infrastructure. I mean, you had Harvey that went through Houston and took out a whole bunch of refineries, and that cut off the whole supply line for a lot of the Southeast. And I think now we're just this week getting out of it in part of Texas. There's still some hauler constraints, but I had no issues with supply and the distribution networks of DEF. So that just shows you the difference in how all that infrastructure and supply works. So I want to just run through this with some of the products that Redco does purchase and distribute. So at the top there is ultra sulfur diesel. That's the gist of our portfolio. We do some red dye for customer-specific sites, various blends of bio, where states are mandating or where there's state incentives for sales taxes, such as Illinois. Kerosene for winter blends where that product is available. Winterized fuel, which is an additized or pre-blended type of product. Renewable diesel. We actually have a location within San Francisco that dispenses 100% renewable diesel. It's basically a cleaned up version of cooking oil, but to a molecular standpoint, it is indistinguishable from that of diesel. We do very little bit of gasoline, but we have some, and we do a bunch of motor oil, coolants, of course the DEF, and we have some natural gas locations out in California that we installed years ago. All right, so this is our volume by region, by month. So you can see we are heavily weighted mostly in the southeast, with the primary state within the southeast of our DF sales is the state of Florida. Outside of just regions, I would say our next states of highest volume is Texas, then California. All right, so let's get into the DEF more. So currently, our footprint has been around tying up with larger national account providers, where currently we are partnered in with Brenntag and Mansfield. And, you know, they've been great for us, and not saying they're the only solutions out there, but it's worked out for us over the years and continue to has been. They've been great partners. We have the benefits from a Ryder standpoint is that, you know, we don't need to manage individual vendors by market or by region. We have one source of contact. We have one set price on a quarterly basis, and that helps our administrative expenses tremendously. The auditing is clean, and it's been a great program. We are able to, because of the one price everywhere, we've been able to spread a lot of that savings across the board, across the nation for. If we have a location that is in the middle of nowhere, it costs me the same as it is if it's just down the street from the distributor. Now, also one of the benefits of this is that we don't get involved with the tank monitoring on DEF. We have center-on devices set up in each and one of our DEF tanks, and those are fed to our vendors and distributed from there on to to our vendor, and then distributed to our distributors after that, where they manage our sites directly, either through getting the dispensing routines or going off the readings alone. I hardly ever get calls from shops saying, hey, I'm out of DEF, what's going on? They do a great job monitoring this, and it's a total hands-off. I got enough problems to deal with on the fuel side, the distributing. I mean, on fuel, you're dealing with how much allocation do I have today? How many shops do I need to get to? Do I have a driver that's carded there? Is it a pump truck? Is it not a pump? There's so many things you need to go through when it comes to the diesel side that I don't have to go through or have the personnel to go do it on the DEF side. So having them hired there has been monumental for us. So the reduction in administrative expenses. And there's absolutely no ordering process involved. I don't have to call up the vendor and say, here's PO 12345, go take this from here to there. None of that. It's all just automated, and it's just autopilot. So the good thing about Brenntag and Mansfield from our perspectives, and there's other players out there I realize, but they have a broad range of a distribution network, and they do all the dirty work. They're the real experts out there. They're the real experts from my vantage point. Single source of contact. If I do have an issue, I know who to call. I don't need to go through my contacts list and see who it is and where. I just call my single person and make it happen. Their guaranteed product of supply, again, never have an issue with no allocations and never have an issue of saying there's no product there. Maybe one time there was something where they didn't have a good reach in that network, but the other vendor could handle it. So it's been a good strategy for us. So DEF really started back in 2009 and 10-ish. So we, from Ryder's perspective, and one of the things I wanted to show you, a lot of the lessons learned. We initially assumed a dosing rate closer to 2%. So we took a lot of analytics on all of our locations of which we're dispensing a lot of fuel, and said, okay, we need to tackle these places first because we don't want to be selling in jugs anymore. We want to give a better price point to customers and have a more efficient way of providing DEF to customers' sites, and also having less waste. The amount of volume that we're doing that in jugs has been absolutely wasteful. So we had our folks go and put in tanks across the board, and we absolutely way under-spec'd it of what ended up happening. So I think we the biggest aha for us was we put in about 500 to 1,000 gallon tanks in most places, and the volume ended up, you know, you go fast forward 2 years, as more and more of the fleet each year was going into the SCR technologies, we realized that we had way under-spec some of this stuff. So we put a big strain on our distributors, and you know, instead of coming once a week, they were coming 3 times a week, and they're saying, hey, you know, is there plans to exchange this tank out for the next? So I think one of the things you really should target if you're a buyer or a consumer is that, you know, really try to shoot for a 2-week storage capacity in your tanks, because that would really relieve the pressures on your vendors. Another thing is checking the low and high level alarms. The next slide I'll demonstrate what that really does, but that has also been a problem, and I'll get more into that next. Obviously, weights and measures, especially if you're selling on a retail side on DF, that's going to be a requirement for sure. A 10-year depreciation cycle. It's not the kind of equipment like bulk fuel where, you know, we really have a lot of that on a 30-year depreciation cycle. The equipment just doesn't have the longevity as that of bulk fuel. But if you have underground tanks, those can go on for a bit longer. I mean, we just put in, I think our first underground tank about 2 months ago in Annapolis was about a 4,000-gallon DEF tank. That was our largest, so which replaced a 1,000-gallon. That was a shop that goes through a lot of volume. So they were coming about 3-4 times a week, and now they just had to come like just once every other week. Another thing is setting up, you know, tanks with heaters inside the cabs anywhere north of like the Mason-Dixon line. That's gonna help keep the product flowing. A lot of the dispensers and reliable dispensers we've used are the Wayne and Gilbarco and occasionally some gas boys. So here's a demonstration of what getting your high and low level alarm settings set properly. I got a call just last week from one of our shops in Ohio. He was a service manager, and he says, why do I keep running out on DEF? This is about a dozen times already over the past few months. What's going on? You got to get on your distributor. I looked up on the Centeron website that we have, which are the probe readers for the tanks. And I'm like, you're not running out. You got plenty of product in your tank. What's happening is that, you know, you're supposed to be dispensing 90% to the top and 10% to the bottom. So in this case, with a 500-gallon tank, this should be getting down about 50, maybe 70 gallons before that pump shuts off. Well, it kept shutting off just a little under 200 gallons. It's way prematurely. So not only does the shop itself, as you can see, all those little changes are deliveries. There are distributors coming more often, and we don't have the right spec and have the right amount of capacity to begin with. And within the capacity of which we had, we were not utilizing it to its best abilities. So we had to get a technician to come on site, which is costly, which is time consuming, and we had to get them to reset them. It's a simple setting. And so that was kind of like another aha. So if you have tanks and you're utilizing them, please make sure you check your high and low level alarm settings. You can probably see in that one around September 10th-ish, we had what looks like a run out, but really what that was is the battery settings. The battery had gotten low and ran out. It makes it look like on the graph that the tanks ran out, but that's not really the case. So do yourselves a favor and just keep your batteries in those probes set and fresh. Now this should be a moot point here, but you know, DEF really only has a shelf life. If you shouldn't be storing DEF for really much more than a year. If you are, either you're having some emergency safety stock outside of a bulk concept. You know, if you're having jugs stored in your back. Keep in mind that it doesn't last forever. If you're in a warm environment in the south, you know, make sure you get through that product probably within a year. So just keep in mind. So I did want to share with you a recent study that we did here at Ryder, and we thought was fascinating. I thought it was worthwhile sharing with you guys. So we took 2 months worth of transactions, which we do about 19 to 20 million gallons a month. And so this should be statistically significant. And we wanted to see what the average dispensing of diesel and DEF per transaction would be, and at what percent full were those tanks when these transactions were taking place by class of vehicle. So you can see here that the most optimizing class was the 16,000 GVW light box truck, where in this case was refueling just 16 and a half gallons per transaction, where the tank was 45% full. And those only have 4-gallon DF tanks, but it filled up when it was just about halfway full. That's the best optimizer. The worst was against what our hypothesis was going into this. Was the sleeper tractor. You would think that these guys would be running longer routes, more miles, and utilizing their full capacity of their tanks. And what we found was that they actually did not do that. They were refilling their tanks, their DF, when they're nearly 70% still full, and in their diesel tanks when they're just 61% full. So, what really could this mean? So, well, that kind of tells you that the driver behavior might be kind of leading to some unnecessary top-offs. I mean, you think of when you coming into fuel at a fuel island, especially during peak times, that could take up to a half hour. You're waiting in line, and by the time you get there, and the refueling process alone can be 15 minutes long. If you have the capacity, utilize that capacity to your fullest and take advantage of that time to being productive in running routes and delivering products. So it either means we're being inefficient with the capacities of which we have, or we're adding we could be adding too much weight to the vehicle. If we're only going to be utilizing the top third of these tanks, then maybe we don't need to have such big tanks and have that extra weight. So we thought it was a pretty interesting findings. Thought I would share that. So going back to some DEF and where the projections are going into the future here. So we, just like a lot of the folks I've heard in the presentations here, is that the commercial vehicle side, it has continued growth. We've been seeing it month to month, and we can consider seeing that going up every year for the foreseeable future as well. But here we are, in 2017, and we wanted to show that Ryder has kind of been in the lead and a pioneer in a lot of the technologies to lead into fuel efficiencies. And the industry is always going to be pushing for efficiencies along this drivetrain to begin with. So knowing this, Ryder is being an industry leader, has put a lot of bells and whistles and a lot of technologies into the vehicles in order to either improve safety, uptime of the fleets, and lower fuel costs. A lot of these things that we've added and been one of the initiators of these have been onboard systems and telematics, forward-looking radar and collision mitigation systems, which are standard within our rental fleet, and our options if you're going to become a lessor of a Ryder, a lessee of Ryder, that you can put those into your vehicle. We have video monitoring and management systems, which is also a standard for our dedicated contract carriage group. Automated manual transmissions, roll stability controls, all these are great safety features. Automatic tire inflation systems, which we just came out with a release just the other day that we just partnered with Apria Technologies for their Halo automatic tire inflators, which is going to help with keeping tires at the proper inflation rates. That's when you have most of the tire blowouts and these tires go low. So that's going to be a safety feature as well as it's going to lead to better fuel efficiencies. And we were also one of the first initiators of the motor oil CK4 10W30 motor oil. We do the low viscosity there. We're going to also see, we've experienced a lot of good fuel efficiencies. That's a good attraction for our company. Aerodynamics and the use of skirts as well. I don't know if you all have heard, but recently there was a run on less study, which was just a few weeks ago, where they took 7 drivers running a total of 50,000 miles, and they had a most unbelievable achievement of taking a heavy-duty vehicle and achieving a 10.1 average MPG, which had a range of 12.8 and a low of 7.1 miles per gallon. That can imply, if that was across the board, would save billions of dollars in fuel expenses. And it just kind of shows you, I think, where this industry is going, and we're, to our hats off, internally, pat on our own backs, is that Ryder's been in the forefront of a lot of these fuel efficiencies, and we push for this every day. And I think that's also going to help with some of the threats into the diesel market as the years go on with electric inception. So could some of these long-term risk and projections be for diesel and DEF? Well, there's a lot of alternatives to diesel currently at the market and projected to be. So going back to 2009 or 10 era, natural gas was the hot topic. I remember being in Ryder working in fuel pricing, and it was what's going to happen with diesel because natural gas is taking over. When the crash came when the oil markets crashed in 2014, that kind of changed the whole sales pitch on what natural gas sales folks were doing, and that kind of product line, even though it still exists and there's plenty of customers that are invested in that and will continue to stay in natural gas, it's much more muted than in years past. But here we are in 2017, and now the hot topic is electric vehicles. We've heard it mentioned throughout a lot of these presentations. But again, Ryder has been on a pioneer in this side, and we've already have partnered with various OEMs into strategic, unique asset classes of the electrical vehicle market as their designated service and maintenance providers. And some of those are shown depicting in some of these pictures down below. Workhorse, which is a pickup truck, and they also have some light-duty vehicles on that end. Change, which has a lot of light-duty and van electric vehicle class, and we made an announcement that we're partnered with Nikola, who's going to be a Class 8 electric vehicle provider. Still probably a few years on that end when that comes out, but each one of these partners that OEMs that we partner with have been done so strategically within their unique classes so that it's going to help our breadth and reach to reach out to customers and what their needs are and where they can get their maintenance. Electric vehicles itself, Ryder just doesn't go and buy these assets and hold them unutilized and depreciate these without it being tied to some customer contract. So we purchased a couple. We already have a few on the road right now in our rental fleet in specific strategic markets where there's some interest, and we're going to test that out and see how that comes back. But we really are waiting for customers to trigger the purchase and acquisitions of these assets because we're very driven on customer needs and their requests. But however, over time, we do think that this could really start to erode the growth of DEF over the years. I just read an article as early as this morning, which I wish I had done it just yesterday because I would have put some of the graphs and stuff on my presentation. But it was suggesting that the cost of the electric vehicle is going to be in parity with that of a diesel vehicle on the commercial side within 10 years, and that on the light duty side it could be 5 years or less. So we could really start seeing this adoption rate skyrocket potentially. And there's still a lot of ifs regarding infrastructure, regulation, but with Ryder, I think we'll probably might see it sooner than what the industry will, because we have a lot shorter life cycle of the vehicles than what the industry will see. The industry, will hold on to these vehicles. There's still vehicles right now are entering into the SCR market, where we are already at 90% of our fleet is SCR. So we've had steady growth and in that product line, but it's kind of at a mature state right now. And the adoption rate for us on this is on electric side is really an unknown because of the fact that we're waiting on customers to really trigger that type of interest. So within the SCR technologies, the target was we're around 40% of the industry is converted over. So there's still a long-term lot of growth opportunities for DEF. I don't see that kind of depleting anytime soon. But for Ryder, I think we're going to realize that probably much quicker. So we could be once again an indicator of where the industry is going much sooner than the actual industry itself publicizes. And that really concludes my presentation. So Hope you find it insightful.
That was great, Ryan. Such good insights there in terms of what it's like to be running a fleet of vehicles and locations using diesel and DEF. We've got time for a few questions, so Ashley's got a microphone ready in his hand if you need to ask a question, and Ali. Raise your hand if you have any questions. I'll start, Ryan, with a question based on some really interesting data you had on consumption numbers. You mentioned your diesel volumes and your DEF volumes, which roughly tie into about 2.5% if I look at your consumption balance. What sort of numbers do you see on a individual vehicle basis or by vehicle class? Are you seeing higher consumption than that? You mentioned you're about 90% SCR already, so
Correct.
I guess that means that number's probably not far off. But what do you see in terms of the trend of the DEF dosing rates on your fleet?
We have absolutely seen those increasing over time. So like I mentioned, we had underestimated that dosing rate early on. We were seeing that increasing. So a lot of that statistics probably could be weighted on some older data, but we are probably pushing to 3.5 soon.
Right.
So I definitely see that increasing.
Yeah, okay. And how does that affect your strategy for your locations in terms of storage and dispensers? You mentioned you started off at 500 or 1,000 gallon storage. Where are you now across your locations? Are you at 1,000 or 4,000 gallon tanks? And for new installations, what size are you going for? And also, do you have DEF at all your locations already?
Not everyone, because some of them just have lower volumes they go through, so it's not worth the investment putting in. So a very small portion of our portfolio of shops have just dispensing but selling by the jug, just because of the small customer base of those areas, or they're leased assets, leased facilities, so it doesn't make sense to invest in the capital equipment to put that kind of investment into it. But I'd say 90% of our facilities do have bulk capacity DF dispensing, and usually they're still at the 500,000 gallon levels for most of them. Any new shops that we're putting in, we are absolutely increasing to about 2,000 to upwards of 4,000 gallon tanks.
Right, interesting. So any questions before we move on? Any questions for Ryan? I have one more question in that case. When you showed us your pattern of consumption over the last 2 or 3 years, and there was an interesting bump in your consumption of DEF in June, I think it was, and a dip in October. I can imagine later in the year there's holiday season, but do you understand the bump in consumption in June? What's that about?
We've had a lot of organic growth, for one. So I think that we've had some new accounts that started in that time frame.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's quite seasonal. So
there are some seasonal swings to it, and we came out of a lower consumption period. So I think things are starting to have kind of getting ramped up.
Right. Very interesting indeed. And your last chance for a question? No, it looks like everything's been answered. So Ryan, thanks again for preparing that and taking us through where you are.